Men, the most effective control doesn't announce itself. It operates in silence, in subtle shifts of behavior, in patterns so gradual you don't notice you're being shaped until you've already transformed into someone you don't recognize. Some women have mastered the art of silent manipulation, control techniques so subtle they feel like your own choices, changes that seem like your own growth, restrictions that look like mutual agreements. These aren't loud demands or obvious ultimatums. They're quiet psychological maneuvers that operate below your conscious awareness. You don't feel controlled because the control doesn't look like control. You believe you're maintaining your independence while gradually losing every marker of your identity. Before we dive in, hit subscribe, smash that like button, and drop a comment if you've ever felt controlled in a relationship but couldn't point to anything concrete. Your recognition might help another man see the pattern before he's completely transformed. Manipulation. 1. Strategic inconsistency, keeping you off balance. This manipulation involves deliberately varying her responses to the same behavior to keep you in a constant state of uncertainty. Monday, she laughs at a joke. Wednesday, she's offended by the same joke. Last week, she wanted you to take initiative. This week, she accuses you of being controlling. She loved your spontaneity. Now she needs you to plan everything. The inconsistency isn't accidental. It's strategic. The manipulation works because humans are pattern-seeking creatures who crave predictability. When responses to your behavior are inconsistent, you can't develop reliable strategies for interaction. You're constantly testing, adjusting, trying to figure out what version of her you're dealing with today. This keeps you reactive rather than proactive, responding to her mood rather than operating from your own center. Notice whether her reactions to your behavior follow any consistent pattern or whether she seems to deliberately vary her response to identical situations. Does she praise your decisiveness one day and criticize it as controlling the next? Does she want emotional openness sometimes and see it as weakness other times? If you can't predict how she'll respond to the same behavior, you're experiencing strategic inconsistency. Watch whether the inconsistency creates anxiety that makes you constantly monitor her mood before acting. Do you find yourself checking her emotional temperature before speaking, trying to gauge which version of her standards you need to meet today? Are you exhausted from trying to hit a target that moves every time you aim? This constant vigilance is the goal. You're so busy managing her reactions that you have no energy for your own needs. Pay attention to what happens when you point out the inconsistency. Does she acknowledge it and work toward more consistent communication? Or does she gaslight you by insisting she's always felt the same way, that you're misremembering, that you're the one who's inconsistent? If she refuses to acknowledge obvious contradictions in her responses, the inconsistency is deliberate. The psychological mechanism is intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful behavior modification tool in psychology. By sometimes rewarding and sometimes punishing the same behavior, she creates an addiction to seeking her approval. You never know which response you'll get, so you keep trying, hoping for the positive reinforcement while unable to predict or avoid the punishment. The real tell is whether the inconsistency benefits her. Does she become more consistent when it serves her needs, but unpredictable when it keeps you off balance? If the pattern of inconsistency always results in you being more accommodating, more careful, more focused on pleasing her, it's not accidental. It's strategic. Watch how you've changed your behavior in response to the inconsistency. Have you become more hesitant, more approval-seeking, more focused on reading her mood than expressing yourself? If you're constantly adjusting to her shifting standards, you're not in a relationship, you're in a behavioral conditioning program. The long-term impact is complete erosion of your sense of self as you become entirely reactive to her fluctuating standards. You stop knowing what you think, feel, or want because you're so focused on trying to predict and accommodate her responses. Your personality becomes a performance designed to minimize her unpredictable displeasure, and you lose the ability to act from your own authentic center. Manipulation 2. Weaponized vulnerability, using weakness as power. This manipulation uses perfectly timed vulnerability to block your boundaries, needs, and autonomy. Every time you're about to assert yourself, she becomes suddenly fragile. When you try to address a problem, she breaks down. When you plan something for yourself, she can't cope. When you gain independence, she has a crisis. Her vulnerability appears exactly when it benefits her. It works because men are socialized to protect and provide. When she looks vulnerable, your instinct is to drop your needs for hers. And she relies on that. The timing ensures you never get to your own priorities. Notice if her emotional collapses always coincide with your attempts to set boundaries or pursue something for yourself. If her crises consistently block your decisions, they're not accidental, they're control. Watch whether her fragility is selective. Is she strong and capable in every other area of life, yet helpless only when your autonomy is involved? If her weakness appears only when you're about to prioritize yourself, it's strategic. Pay attention to what happens after you give in. Does she recover quickly once you've cancelled plans or abandoned your needs? If the problem disappears the moment you comply, it wasn't a real crisis, it was manipulation. The psychological trick is pitting your protective instinct against your self-interest. She creates a false choice. Be a good partner or have your own life. The real test is whether she tries to build resilience. Does she seek coping tools, support systems, or growth? Or does she stay perpetually fragile in ways that require your constant sacrifice? If nothing improves, the vulnerability is a tool, not a condition. Also, watch how she responds to your needs. Does she give the same support she demands, or does your vulnerability become yet another burden on her? If only one person is allowed to be fragile, and it's always her, the dynamic is rigged. Long term, you stop asserting needs altogether. Boundaries vanish because they trigger her distress, which triggers your guilt. Eventually, you stop believing your needs matter, and that's the point. Manipulation. 3. Preemptive victimhood. Being hurt before you can be. This manipulation makes her the injured party before you can express your legitimate grievances. You come to address her behavior, but she's already hurt by your tone, timing, or lack of understanding. The conversation shifts from what she did to how you supposedly made her feel, and you end up apologizing while your original concern disappears. It works because decent men don't want to cause pain. By being hurt first, she ensures all emotional energy goes to her feelings, never yours. Notice if you can actually raise concerns without the discussion turning into a lecture about your delivery. If every attempt to address her actions ends with you apologizing for how you brought it up, you're dealing with preemptive victimhood. Watch who apologizes in conflicts. When she hurts you, do you still end up apologizing? If you're always the one saying sorry regardless of the original harm, she's positioned herself as the default victim. Pay attention to how she recounts conflicts. Are you always the aggressor in her retellings, even when you calmly addressed her behavior? Does she highlight how attacked she felt while erasing what you raised? If she's the victim in every story, she's rewriting reality around her feelings. The psychological trick is flipping the moral order. Your hurt becomes your wrongdoing. Her reaction to hearing your complaint becomes more important than your complaint itself. The real sign is whether your concerns ever get resolved. Does she ever acknowledge harm and change behavior? Or do all conversations end with you comforting her because criticism hurt her? Look at the emotional labor you perform just to express pain. Do you have to cushion every concern with reassurance, manage her emotions while explaining your own, and offer comfort for upsetting her? If bringing up issues requires supporting her more than addressing the problem, the system is designed to silence you. Long term, You learn that speaking up causes more damage than staying quiet. You stop raising issues, start doubting your own feelings, and eventually believe that your needs are attacks and your boundaries are injuries. To her. Manipulation. 4. Invisible labor. Scorekeeping, creating debt you can't repay. This manipulation keeps a running score of everything she does while ignoring what you contribute. She remembers every meal she cooked or favor she did, but somehow forgets your equal or greater efforts. You're always behind in a game where only her points count. It works because healthy relationships rely on reciprocity. By making her contributions hyper-visible and yours invisible, she creates a dynamic where you always feel like the one who owes more. Notice whether conversations about who does what ever include your effort. Does she acknowledge what you do or dismiss it as less valuable? If her contributions are always remembered and yours always forgotten, the ledger is rigged. Watch how different types of labor are scored. Does her emotional effort count more than your physical effort? Do the things she does because she thought about them count, while the things you actually do don't? If the scoring system always weighs in her favor, it's not fair accounting, it's manipulation. Pay attention to when she brings up her contributions. Does the long list appear only during arguments, especially when you assert a need or boundary? If the scoreboard only shows up when it benefits her, it's a control tactic, not fairness. The psychological goal is to create chronic indebtedness so you feel lucky to have her and guilty for wanting more. You're too busy paying back imagined debt to notice you might actually be giving more than you get. The real sign is whether she values your contributions equally. Does she thank you or treat your efforts as expected while hers are treated as extraordinary? If your work is minimized and hers is magnified, the system is intentionally distorted. Long term, you end up in a permanent chase, doing more, sacrificing more, trying to catch up. But you never can, because the scoring system was never meant to acknowledge your contributions in the first place. Manipulation 5. Strategic silence, wielding absence. As weapon, this manipulation uses silence as punishment, withdrawing communication, affection, and emotional presence without ever explaining why. You feel the coldness, but she won't tell you what you did or how to fix it. You end up guessing, apologizing blindly, and trying to repair a rupture you don't understand. It works because people hate relational disconnection. The uncertainty makes you desperate to restore harmony, so you change any behavior that might be the issue. Notice if conflicts end in honest discussion or in her silent withdrawal. If she regularly goes cold without explanation and makes you figure out the crime, you're dealing with strategic silence. Watch her responses when you ask what's wrong. Does she say nothing, insist you should know, or make you guess until you hit the right answer? If she punishes you for an unnamed offense, the silence is deliberate. Pay attention to what ends the silence. Does it lift when you've shown enough remorse, made concessions, or changed behavior, even if you don't know why? If the silence lasts just long enough to change you, it's control, not processing. The mechanism is simple. She uses your need for connection to force behavior change without ever defending her expectations. You end up offering multiple apologies and concessions just to win back warmth. The key sign is whether she wants resolution or submission. Does the silence end with understanding and clarity, or with you proving compliance while still unsure what happened? Over time, you begin self-censoring, avoiding anything that might trigger withdrawal. You walk on eggshells, constantly monitoring her mood. Your behavior becomes shaped by fear of her absence rather than mutual agreement. Silence becomes her most effective tool, and your cage. Manipulation. 6. Proxy criticism, attacking through others. This manipulation criticizes you indirectly by claiming other people have issues with you. It's never her opinion. It's her friends thinking your hobbies are weird, her mum disliking your clothes, co-workers wondering about your ambition. The criticism comes wrapped in social pressure, making it harder to challenge. It works because judgment from multiple sources feels more valid than one opinion. But you can't verify these claims, and by relaying them instead of defending you, she signals agreement while dodging responsibility. Notice if she often starts with, "My mum said," "everyone thinks," or "people are asking." If outside voices constantly deliver critique through her, you're dealing with proxy criticism. Watch whether these people are ever named. If the critics stay vague or anonymous, they might not exist. It might just be her using imaginary consensus to voice her own judgments. Pay attention to her reactions. Does she defend you to these supposed critics, or does she pass the negativity straight to you? If she amplifies it instead of blocking it, she wants you to feel it. Psychologically, this reframes her preferences as social norms. By making it seem like everyone agrees, she pushes you to comply and discourages pushback. The real test is what happens when you try to address the criticism directly. If she discourages it or says you're overreacting, she likely fabricated or exaggerated the comments. Also note whether she ever shares positive feedback or only the negative. If she only relays judgment, she's curating your insecurity. Long-term, this leads to internalized social anxiety. You start adjusting yourself to meet the standards of people who may not even exist, letting imaginary critics shape your self-worth. Manipulation. Manufactured triangulation, using others to create competition. This manipulation creates constant triangles where you're competing for her attention or approval. She praises her ex for things you lack, highlights male friends who share interests you don't, compares you to her father or co-workers, and keeps you aware that better options exist. The goal is to make you feel replaceable. It works because it triggers attachment anxiety. By reminding you of alternatives, she pushes you to prove your worth, instead of asking whether she's worthy of you. Notice if she brings up other men specifically when you fall short. Exes when you fail at something, co-workers when your joke misses, male friends when you want a quiet night. Frequent implicit comparisons aren't random, they're manufactured triangulation. Pay attention to tone. Are these comments neutral, or do they carry a quiet "unlike you"? If the subtext is always what other men give her that you don't, it's deliberate. Look at her boundaries with these comparison figures. Are they kept just close enough to provoke anxiety, but not close enough to actually threaten the relationship? If she maintains flirtation or emotional intimacy that crosses lines, they're tools, not accidents. The psychological purpose is simple. Keep you competing. If you're busy trying to win her, you won't evaluate if she's good for you. Watch how she reacts when you express discomfort. Does she reassure you and make boundaries clear, or accuse you of jealousy and insecurity? If she won't stop the triangles, it's because she needs them. And if you stop competing, if you act secure, does she escalate the comparisons? If so, your insecurity is the point. Long-term, this creates constant performance anxiety. You keep auditioning for a role she'll never give you because she needs you striving, not secure.